Okay, let's explore some additional use cases that I think would be very useful within finance and treasury teams to leverage agentic AI and agent mode within ChatGPT. The first use case that I want to talk about is a policy monitor assistant. Now, this is going to be great at reviewing documents for references to defined policies and flag potential compliance risks, and then take the necessary actions. So imagine a world where you have the model connected to an email inbox or a Google Drive folder, perhaps, that is going to be receiving documents, perhaps PDF documents that need to be reviewed, typically by a human, to confirm if those documents are in line with our internal policies. Well, we can create an agent to do that and review those documents and flag any potential discrepancies or compliance risks. And then, go ahead and send an email to notify a manager on the team to let them know that we have these discrepancies, or go ahead and perform an action within a given system if we have the right integrations and API connections in place. So this is a great use case. It would be applicable within quote to cash, within procure to pay, within treasury transactions that we want to make sure are aligned to any covenants that we have in place, with any investment policies that we have in place, etc., etc. I think even more broadly, a use case to consider here is a knowledge assistant. So this is where you can create an agent that can interact, not only interact with an end user, but take action. So earlier we saw the use case of creating our own HR policy and benefits interpretation custom GPT model back in chapter 5. And then what we can do is make it agentic. And we can do that by building in automated escalation steps that the agent can take and execute autonomously based upon the context provided. So instead of coming back to the user and saying, hey, user, can you send an email to this email address to get your question answered? We can make sure that there's an API in place, perhaps to a ticketing system or a connection to our email outlet of choice, and go ahead and send that email for us, looping in the appropriate people and getting that executed for our end users automatically. And imagine now that use case applied all across finance and treasury. We can really start to automate these processes and give time back to our people to focus on what matters most. So with that, I think that's a wrap for chapter 6. Please don't forget that agentic AI does not replace finance teams. What it does is it formalizes how great finance teams already work, as we saw when we broke down the processes between what can be automated and what still requires human judgment. And we can really get great use out of these agent models by providing clearer steps and very specific objectives, and the output's going to give us better and frankly quicker visibility into exceptions and variances that we want to explore, and it's going to give us time back to focus on the tasks that require judgment and spending more time there so we can make the right recommendations to our leadership team. So to summarize what we've covered in chapter 6, we've really covered some great use cases by hopping into ChatGPT and leveraging agent mode. Now these use cases and more could be leveraged within all finance and treasury teams alike. We started off by breaking down our cash flow variance process into steps that can be automated versus those that require some level of judgment. And we use that to provide very specific instructions to the ChatGPT model and how to execute those tasks at hand. Then we applied this same concept to automate much of our cash flow forecasting process, specifically updating an existing model based upon new inputs. And now we can lean on that agent to go ahead and update the forecast for us, explain the details and highlight areas of risk. And that's going to help free up our treasury analysts to focus on more important tasks, like challenging the underlying assumptions that have been made by the agent to create that revised model, instead of manually preparing that forecast on whatever cadence you're updating your forecast internally, whether that's weekly, monthly. By leveraging an agent, maybe you have the opportunity to execute it more frequently. And then we turned our attention to automating a bank reconciliation process. And I really think this is going to be huge for many companies, especially smaller companies that are still managing this process today in offline in Excel files and doing it manually. Now, while other companies are able to do this within their ERP or TMS, by leveraging an agent, you're going to get much more flexibility, especially when it comes to things like processing your own matching rules and tolerances, where these can be a bit rigid depending upon how they've been built within your ERP or TMS. And the fact that you can describe these rules in plain language versus providing them in a very specific way that is needed for those rules to be processed in that system. And then finally, we touched on some additional use cases to think about where you can leverage agentic AI within your own teams. We didn't look at specific examples within ChatGPT for those, but hopefully you can see from the previous examples the steps that you would take to experiment with that. Now, in our next lesson, we're going to be focused on build versus buy scenarios. We're going to be looking at when we should build our own AI-specific solutions, and then when we should be thinking about buying a solution. We're going to talk about the importance of connectivity and integrations to our AI model and how that's going to support this agentic behavior that we just explored here. Once you have those direct integrations and API connections, you can truly have an autonomous process that runs in the background versus executing it manually, as we just saw in the examples in this chapter. And then we're not just going to talk about build versus buy scenarios. We're going to make this practical and help you figure out how to decide the right thing for any given scenario. And we're going to do that by walking through a vendor evaluation checklist that you can use right away to start making decisions for your team and for your company. So congratulations, you have successfully completed this module. Thank you. I'll see you in the next chapter.